Welcome to the Do That Music Thing podcast, hosted by Christopher Foust and presented by 1840 Music Group. This is the podcast where we dive deep with the people pushing the music industry forward, whether it's managers making bold moves, promoters breaking new ground, lawyers changing the game, or artists blazing their own trail. We talk to the folks making it happen. Every episode is packed with real-world stories, strategies, and tactics you can use to grow your own career in music. If you're looking to break through or just stay sharp, you're in the right place. Let's get into it and do that music thing. Good morning and welcome to another amazing episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast. Today I've got an amazing guest. I believe this is the first time we've had a song producer, a sound designer, as it were, on the show. I want to welcome to the Do That Music Thing podcast, Mr. Olo Von Borg. Good morning, or I guess in your case, good evening.
Hello, Chris. Yeah, good evening, good day to you. Hailing from wonderful Berlin.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Being an independent, artist and producer and engineer, I could ask you a billion questions, but we're going to have to shorten it down for the listeners today, because I'm really interested to kind of hear your story. I want to hear about, some of your techniques and some of your strategies, but let's get started first. And please tell the listeners a little bit about you and kind of how you ended up where you are today.
Well, if you want to start at the beginning, let's go to the very beginning. My parents thought it was a great idea to put me in front of the piano when I was about 6 years old. So that started the same time I entered primary school. And because I have a rather musical side of the family on my mother's side, basically you had to perform on Christmas Eve with my cousins, and all that led to being rather annoyed with being sent to practice twice a week and every day at home. And then I discovered synthesizers, which was basically the same tool, but better sounds, so much cooler sounds than just a piano. And the first one I got was a Roland D50, and then I started entering sequencing music with one of the earlier tools, a mod tracker on a Commodore Amiga 500 called the Pro Tracker. And that was really my starting point. And this little Pro Tracker had a lot of features that were very progressive for the time. You could edit samples, reverse them, and all these things. So I knew about sample editing. And after graduating school, I wanted to get trained as an audio engineer, basically. And I went to School of Audio Engineering by the great Tom Missen. And that was an era when we were still cutting tape and recording everything analog. I remember I had to record a drum kit with like 24 different microphones and channels and mix all that, and under the eagle eyes of my supervisors. And then we got to a point where it got to digital editing. And I was basically telling my supervisors what to do. So next semester, I was teaching that class while still being a student there. And the same thing happened with sequencing. And I spent about 4 years there. And I had to do certain things because there was a mandatory civil military service in Germany still at that era. Then I became a university student, and like many artists, you don't really know what you want to do. So you start out with something like psychology and you find your way somewhere. But music was always my first love, and I kept doing it. And that was pretty much the first chapter where the way I got into it. And then the internet happened. And that was really a key point, because you probably remember that yourself. You found your tribe. And especially as a musician, and I'm not sure that you are aware of what happened in the 90s, not only in my country, but especially in the city of Berlin. The club culture was just phenomenal. The rave culture grew, and all the togetherness and the love parades. We had the first mega raves, the May Day events and all that stuff. And I got into a lot of it. And funnily, I do remember a lot of it, unlike a lot of the other folks. And that music wasn't popular. But I found film producers online who really wanted to use that music. And there was one fella from Canada who was doing road interview stuff for the Canadian Broadcasting Company, and he shot a documentary, many documentaries, but one in particular that was following the US troops into Iraq. And he had his very own take on this thing, and mixed with high tempo techno acid beats. This was a very special thing, and got me a lot of follow-up jobs. And this is how I ended up working in Studio City for a bit. Also, there was an internet community of music producers around a special DAW that became kind of popular, which is called Reason.
And favorite. I don't interrupt you.
Please let me know what are your feelings about Reason, because that reaction was priceless.
I have been using Reason since 2005, and I love everything about it. Now, I've got Pro Tools. I use it because everybody in Nashville uses it, but I have introduced so many people to Reason that had no idea it existed. But I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to just say that, yeah, Reason is the best.
Beautiful. Yeah, it was very handy back at that audio engineering school. I could explain all the hardware stuff with the software. And I could practice all the hardware stuff within the software. And there were a lot of things you could really do with it. The one thing you couldn't do was tracking, audio tracking in general, which basically made vocals and stems and acapellas unavailable. But yeah, that all that changed after a while, and the stuff we can use today. I've just recently been testing UA's Luna, and it's just super handy. I think it would take me maybe a week to explain all the functions to a novice. And that's probably the case with most DAWs you can find in the market. I think there's more than a dozen right now, right? Yeah, but Reason still has a lot of my sort of the muscle memory, if you will, is in there. And the fact that you can use it in any other DAW nowadays is just very, very good for the company. Yeah, Pro Tools, of course, is the mother of all things in many regards. And you really start to appreciate Pro Tools when you hook it up to an Avid machine, because the abilities of syncing with basically movie studio equipment, even if you have an LE version of Pro Tools, is phenomenal. But that's all stuff from the past, because nowadays all you need to do a movie is top-notch smartphone, but you're done with that. Yeah, I'm wondering, knowing the content of Reason's factory sound bank, did that translate to you for country or folk in any form?
So Reason, um, the one thing I love about Reason is it allows me, and for the people who don't know out there, Reason is now I think considered a full DAW because I record vocals into it. I do acoustic instruments into it on top of all of, the loops or on top of any of the virtual instruments. But the reason why I love Reason is it allows someone who is a one-stop shop like myself who records multiple instruments, and I can write a song myself and I can produce it entirely by myself. And Reason makes that possible because it has such fantastic um, uh, the synthesizers are incredible, and you can do a lot of really cool ethereal, really thicken up tracks, but it also has some really great virtual instruments. I've found some
Mm.
really great um, you know drum triggers essentially through, I think it's UJ. I have to double check who it is, but um, some really great acoustic drums. There's some really great acoustic guitar loops as well. Like there's really awesome things that you can do, and you can manipulate sound that you bring into it. So let's
Yeah,
say that I don't have a steel guitar, like I don't have a pedal steel or a lap steel, but I can take a slide, like a guitar slide, and I can use my guitar and I can manipulate it, throw it into a sample, and just completely refigure the sound, but it makes it easy. And my second favorite thing why I love about it is I too was trained on analog gear. I was trained to tape. And when the first time I opened up Reason, I was really scared because I was like, I don't know how the learning curve is going to be insane. But I opened it up and I'm like, oh, thank God, it looks like an SSL console, or it looks, I was like, I know how to use this. Um, and so,
yeah. The surface, the GUI, has always is the best thing about it, and automating anything just by touching it, basically. I had the big fortune to use Reason for 4 years with a touch screen that was mounted like a rack. So you could really do hardware analog stuff, like you had a panel in front of you and stuff. That was awesome. But that monitor died on me, unfortunately. And yeah. But there is an iOS version of Reason. Have you tried that yet? It's something I enjoy so much that it would often lead to me missing a bus stop.
I love that.
No, no kidding. And it's very basic. It has a drum machine, a bass synth, and a melodic synth. And I think the longest you can do is 32 bars. But it's very handy to put down ideas, and you can send it to your Reason as a file and reopen it there and keep editing. But yeah, I think it's almost unwarranted that we're praising the software so much when all the users are so bloody disappointed regarding what's happening there for the previous 3 years, maybe. On one hand, you can say it's good that there is something happening at all, right? Someone bailed them out and kept them alive. But the way they are working off that debt isn't pretty, and I hope they're getting better soon.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the the way the pay models that a lot of these DAWs have moved is disappointing for people, I think, in the 30 to 50 age bracket, because
Yes.
we're used to buying the piece of hardware and it's ours. That's it, right? Or be buying the piece of software and that's it. So, but for young kids coming up, the subscription model thing is like, second nature to them. I don't particularly like it, especially when you start to do things like you have to purchase plug-in licenses, and things can add up really quick. But on the flip side, you mentioned the reason the iOS app. I think that while we are battling things like subscription models and that sort of thing, there is also something to be said for the amount of free tools that are available to artists and how underutilized they are. I think that a lot of people, a lot of artists are still kind of under this impression that, oh, I have to go book studio time. I have to go. And I'm like, realistically, all you might need is this. And I,
Yeah.
I, I say that with some caveats, of course, but, one time I was in a recording studio with a full band, and this was a rock band. And we were in there because a friend of mine owned the studio, and the session canceled for the day. He's like, "You guys just want to come in and jam?" I was like, "Yeah, I've got some songs I could, kind of let you hear." And we tracked 5 songs live in the same room, no overdubs. And my friend mixed them down same day, right? Guitar left, guitar right, drums, bass up the middle. Um, Instrumental tracks, right? But full rock band. And he sent me the mixed ish stereo files, and I sat on those for 3 years. Didn't do anything with them, and then one day, uh, I got very upset at my work, my day job, and I found those stereo tracks, and I was like, well, I don't have time to record um, but traditionally. Like, I can't record vocals to these. So what I did is I took my iPhone, I dropped those stereo files into GarageBand on my phone, which is free software, and I put my earbud headphones, my Apple, the wired ones, I just plugged them in, and I found the sweet spot, like holding it away from me to kind of like find the right
Yeah.
level. And I tracked all of my vocals for the Foust EP. One of my rock bands is named Foust, and the first EP that we released is that EP. The vocals were recorded in a moving vehicle with an earbud. So, and I, of course, now I took those and I dropped them into Pro Tools to kind of mix the vocal level into
Being
the
up a
stereo
little.
tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But that's how I did it. It didn't. All of that was free essentially. It came with the phone. The earbuds came with the phone, and that there was a single on that record that won Single of the Year at Wigwam Radio Awards. It got us in a lot
Good
of
stuff.
podcasts. But what I'm getting at is that don't overthink it. Like there's some free tools out there. You can at least get started and get creative and kind of get the juices flowing.
Yeah. One of my, and if I say popular, I have a very small followership online, and I'm okay with that. I've always been kind of exclusive. Like I said, a techno freak and raver in the 90s. You were very lonesome in many cases. But one of those tracks I wrote just for the fun of it came from a voicemail. I have a friend, she is of French origin, and was just a jolly conversation going on, and she started singing some kind of French folklore song into the voicemail with her daughter. And 10 minutes later, I'm sitting there editing. And because it is sort of a two-tempo thing, right? So first a bit of a shanty-like thing, and then it goes really full polka, basically. I had to add tempo automation, which is something my club people, we usually don't do that. And yeah, it's a superb song, and it's doing so well in France, which is very generous of the French people, that I didn't ruin their cultural heritage entirely. And yeah, absolutely agree that the jamming factor is so much more important than an expensive audio interface or a $900 microphone. And to be absolutely frank, most of the audience you have nowadays, they have been trained on very sophisticated hearing devices, which is in no way what you have been through and I have been through with all the analog linear gear. So you probably have to master differently today anyways.
The mastering is an interesting conversation too, because it is interesting because I remember mixing records to tape and or just mixing in general. I just remember there not being such a huge focus on high end.
Yeah.
And now there is such a huge focus on high end. And I'm sure that has to do with, you know, the way digital recording works and, you know, and how it captures sound. But I'd love to get your input on transitioning from analog to digital. The only piece of the transition that I remember is there was a brief period where I used Radar, which was like a digital tape system where it felt like a tape. It had like the little, you know, the console on wheels, the like the transport. It felt like a tape controller, but it was connected to some hard drives, I think, and then connected to its own screen, and you could edit the WAV files. But I used that for a year, and then it was straight to Pro Tools. So I'd love to get your take on how you handled that transition.
One of the transitional things I experienced was mini disc, and the editing abilities within the hardware were amazing, right? You could cut down pieces by the 10th of a second. It was pretty remarkable. And I also remember using DAT for a short while, which functioned like tape, but stored data like a drive, like a disk drive. I remember the probably closest thing to your question was a tape deck I was using post mixer. The computer output went into a hardware mixer, and that hardware mixer went into a tape. That tape was set to record, and I was using a regular iron chrome tape, something cassette tape. And the saturation you got from that setup, I basically got a bit back from the digital world, or got a bit analog back from losing it in the digital world. But yeah, I was always very fond of the digital stuff to begin with, because compact discs would fit in my pocket when I went to school, or in my bag. And vinyl never did. And I won't make many friends saying this, but the storage quality of a vinyl disc is inferior to almost any other way of storing it. Maybe better than clay pot Rebels or something. I don't know. It is just that in that era when records were the main product, right, the only medium basically, the engineers had to work really, really bloody hard. And they were very, very good. some of them still exist today, but you just can't get that sound from a recording medium that has a data density that is 4-bit, maybe. But yeah, so digital was something I really appreciated. And the moment I got a laptop that allowed me to work in a park, I was basically there. And having reason in a park was phenomenal. And I think about 3 years ago, I experienced a similarly awesome event, which was sitting in a park, but also listening on a $900 studio, $900 rent per hour studio when VSX came around. I'm not sure if you're using it. Stephen Slate's
No, I'm
room
not.
emulation.
Mm-mm.
It is so incredibly good. I used to tingle through all these little studios we had here in Berlin to get references, basically, for a mix and find out if it works there, that's good for the mids and the bass. If it works there, I can rely on this guy knowing that the hi-hats are okay and so forth. And you'd spend hundreds just on listening to your reference track. And the infamous car, right? Every other person would check their final mix in the car. And we had this weird professor back at this audio engineering school who would say, the only reference that counts is your nana's kitchen radio. Basically setting the bar for absolute lo-fi, right? And VSX allows me to switch the studio within 3 seconds and even use different speaker sets or monitor sets and different headphones, even different clubs. And that on the go is probably the best thing ever.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. And I was at a point where I was either deciding to renovate my bedroom studio to a degree where it would be acoustically acceptable or buy this thing.
Good move.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because the monitoring kit I have is probably a little too much for this room. Oh, what is this in feed? It doesn't really matter. I love using my Adam monitors, by the way. If you've ever had the chance of listening to them.
I have. They're incredible. And that's another thing too that maybe we could delve into a little bit. Our monitors, right? And I think a lot about selecting monitors too. I do think it is partially subjective, right? Because I think that when you get a set of monitors, you kind of have to learn them and then
Yes.
learn the room that you're in and how those speakers engage in the room. And then you kind of have to tweak how you mix to kind of compensate for, things in the room, because it's incredibly difficult nowadays to get an absolutely isolated room where you can hear everything. So yeah, the atoms are incredible. In fact, a lot of those first projects I did were on atoms. And then I like events as well. I like those. Those are a lot of the ones I used in smaller studios, were the events. And what's funny too is the last thing I'll say is the ones that everyone uses here in town are the Yamaha NS10s. Everybody, You would be amazed, or maybe not amazed, maybe our listeners would be amazed about how many hit records have been mixed through Yamaha NS10s.
That's a good monitor. But like you said, it is really the combination of a lot of factors and knowing your speakers, getting to know them with 2 or 3 tracks, really, really well. But take a track you've always loved, or take one you've always hated. There is a lot of music that is so well mixed, but just not my cup of tea. And we were talking earlier about certain music genres flipping in their leaning in society, let's call it that. So mainstream or rebellious can shift back and forth. And one of the most popular exports from Germany is undoubtedly Rammstein. They are a former East German punk band. They were arrested for disobedience in the German Democratic Republic so very often. And then they turned after the war came out and became this phenomena. But then they also use something which I'm quite tired and sick of, which is, if you think of Germany, thinking of people marching with torches, I think that's a bit dated and shouldn't be boosted. But you know the image Rammstein has, right? It was sort of aggressive, dark, slightly menacing, and that's exactly the Nazis in the Indiana Jones films. And that was a leftist-leaning punk band in one of the leftist countries on earth at that point. So there's a shift. And I think we were talking about countries sort of losing their punk a little.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that may have happened a little earlier, but wasn't that obvious because the superstars were still sort of folksy enough, right? The guy you would have a drink with. But think about the record bosses, even back in the 60s, 50s. Music was a product in an industry. And we can make a leap to today from that, which means self-publishing your stuff independent of any form of threshold. Getting popular is another thing. But just getting it out there, you can do that for, I don't know, $100 a year.
Yeah, the democratization of music distribution has absolutely changed, well, what popular even means, right? It's weird how these non-mainstream artists become popular within a large group of individuals, but they're still not mainstream, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that's completely um, a byproduct of the democratization of music, being able to make a record at home and then upload it to the internet and getting it distributed amongst the world immediately.
I don't remember that from the 80s to the 2010s, maybe, where I would go to concerts and that kind of stuff, that you had bands who had probably basically 5 to 10,000 fans capacity. And they would not be touring like they are today. And I have a friend who has been into this very niche electro stuff, and Today he's touring Japan, right? And there are so many things that became possible with this. But on the other hand, you have the debate regarding how much is a digital copy of a song really worth, not just to you, but to advertisers, to a person who is entirely oblivious of this artist. I think 99 cents is probably the most honest price we have ever paid for music on a medium. Because the magic of live music is so very different. And I think we've also seen a rate in ticket prices, quite the hike. So the price for music goes down from what was a single back in the 90s? $9, a tenner, maybe something like 6 hamburgers worth to have an economic reference here. I mean, an album was 30 hamburgers.
An album for us in the late 90s, it was about $10. And then in the early 2000s, it jumped. It almost doubled, where an album would
Yeah,
cost
I remember.
close to $20 around like 2004. But then, the whole advent of Napster just completely threw everybody for a loop. And
That was phenomenal. And I'm still waiting for a documentary of people talking about their first download on Napster. You could just fill a probably Netflix show with just celebrities A to D admitting what they were downloading first.
right.
I think it was something Britney for me. God, this woman was mega back there. Yeah, that's changed a lot of things. And yeah, so but today, I mean, like I mentioned, I have quite few streams because I just don't invest in publicity. That's just not me. There are so many people who would do that better. I used to have something like management. Unfortunately, that person did not survive the COVID virus. So that basically tanked a lot of things. I had a tour planned with educating people, training them, combined with jam sessions afterwards. Like you do a Thursday evening and a Friday morning tutoring session. And then the rest of the weekend is jamming and recording. That would have been sort of the Olo experience. But that died because of that. And yeah, at some point I realized that I'm having more fun doing stuff that is financially totally independent. That I just don't care for fame anymore. And the amount of people listening to my music in places I will never go to or have never been to. I am old school enough that brings me to tears, man. Right? Zimbabwe, there are people in the mother continent of all human race listening to my music, answering back all the tribal vibes they have given.
That's amazing. But that's a beautiful thing though. And I think it's one thing that kind of um, artists kind of miss, right? Is if you view promoting your music as kind of like a pain, right? Like you don't, especially when it comes to social, you kind of reframe it to how do I connect with other humans? Right? I mean, music is like the great connector, right? It's one of the easiest ways to meet people, to start conversations, to show people how you feel. You share music. And so I think that if you can reframe how you promote your music with that type of mindset versus, well, how many views can I get? Or how many, likes can I get? But switch it to something like, where can I get my music heard today that hasn't heard my music, right? Africa,
Yeah.
go for it.
There are so many places where I just thinking of the idea that there is a person who probably by accident came across something. And I have been talking to strategists and all this stuff, the usual stuff, this follow a certain super popular artist within the genre, emulate them, poach their followers, and then basically pass them by if you can. I don't care for all that. If there's a person liking my stuff, that's awesome. I took the chance of this online distribution thing to wrap up the previous 25 years of the best of my daily output, basically. That you put down 10 song ideas, there's probably one in there that's worth working on again. And out of those, it's 10% that is really, really good. And I keep saving my documents by editing date or sorting them. So the cream will go back to the top because, right, if you work on something, it's probably worth looking at again. And this approach, I basically made a triple album. And because it's the truffles, I called this thing the Three Piglets.
Love that.
And because I can't help but blatantly promote those things. This is one, this is two, and this is three. And they're all on on all bloody platforms. And it's music unlike most stuff you've ever heard. A lot of my music is a reflection of inputs. And that's probably nothing special or novel, but that's what I do. And I love making homages. I love breaking genre borders, which makes this find a genre and follow a particular artist extremely hard. Plus, there are all these things that are coming into play that we're aware of nowadays. Like you as an artist and music person probably weren't a jock in your school days. Me neither. And just because you're making music and everybody is calling you David Silver, wink, wink, it just wasn't easy to connect with people who hadn't sort of these special senses. And yeah, I would probably be described as neurodiverse nowadays. But back in my day, all we had was Rain Man. And when you wouldn't want to be called a Rain Man. So yeah, there were a lot of interesting hurdles, but by comparison, I still think it's better than the generations of people that came from helicopter and bulldozer parents, I'm afraid. But we'll see where that leads us.
Well, Olo, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it. I love getting to talk, especially tech with people. And so where can people learn more about you and your music?
Well, there is one very easy way, which is a link tree. You'll probably be able to mention that domain, and it's just linktree/OVB. And also Olo Von Borg is pretty easy to find on those platforms. And I think I could provide you with a link you can post with the show at some point. And I want to thank you for listening to all the interesting or not so interesting stuff I've been mentioning. Plus, enduring my irremovable accent.
We love it. We love it. And next, we'll book another conversation, and we're going to talk nothing but the Berlin rave scene. I want to hear more about that. But
there's a lot. Yes,
yeah,
that was a lot of fun, and like I said, not many people remember.
Well, Olo, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invite and having me, Chris. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely.
All the best to your listeners and to yourself.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast. To learn more about me, the host, Christopher Foust, you can catch me online at christopherfoust.com, on Instagram at chrisfaustmusic, or on Twitter at chrisjamesgtr. If you'd like to be a guest on the Do That Music Thing podcast, please feel free to email me at chrisfaustmusic@gmail.com. If you're a fan of the show, head on over and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Foust. Let's go do that music thing.